Hello, everybody. Slightly Slanted Sleuth coming at you with Matthew LaCroix, the one and only author, grand truther, Matt LaCroix. He's got a book called The Illusion of Us out, and he's working on another stages of time. Sorry about that. But anyway,
of time.
Yeah. Matthew's, he's been an integral part of my awakening. 3.5 years ago, he was one of the first people that I came across. Him, Gerald Clark, and Rex Baer did a show together, and it just, boom, made me pop. And Matthew's got a great presentation lined up here. So with that, Matthew, go ahead, take it away.
Well, hey, thanks, Steve. Steve's been a longtime supporter of mine, and he's always been this type of truther who sends all these phenomenal questions and is very much on the same page as me. So we put together this little discussion that I hope everybody enjoys. And the title of this and what we're going to be going over is going to be focusing on how do we define our perception of reality and what goes into our perceptions of reality. Is it all just very simple? We just open our eyes and we understand everything we see, or is there a lot more to it? And we're going to then go into the progression of human civilizations, the ancient gods, duality on this earth, dimensions. We're gonna get into the whole thing, and we're even gonna talk about some current events that are going on right now. So Steve, tell me a little bit about yourself before we jump in here.
Well, I'm a stonemason, and been married.
Isn't that interesting, though, huh? With everything you know about Masons and
right,
going all the way back.
Right, and also my number is 333, so I don't know.
Wow.
But anyway. I'm a stonemason, been married 26 years, got 4 kids, and I'm a hardworking individual for the man, and I'm ready for change, just like everyone out there, I'm sure is, because our world right now is heating up, and so are the people. And
absolutely.
We need change, and, you're an excellent source of information when it comes to, extra dimensional and extraterrestrial influence, and that's why I wanted you to come on and share your story.
Well, thank you so much. Let's jump right in. I'll start sharing and we can get started here. All right. Can you see that?
Yes, sir.
Great. So the first thing I wanted to have a discussion with you about, Steve, is I want to briefly touch on what is going on the planet right now. What is going on with our current consciousness, and what's going on with these changes with the earth. And I'm sure you're one of these people that has very much noticed the huge increase in volcanism and seismic activity and all of these strange anomalies that are going on. We're seeing, I feel like we're seeing some large meteorite shoot through the sky like once a week on basis here. This is very unusual activity is going on the planet. Do you have any take on what you think is going on? And I'll give you my.
To top it off, they're not only flying in, the governments are looking for them. The one off of the coast over there, off of Washington.
Yes, they are. The NASA's actually in the ocean looking for one of those meteorites. Yeah. Why are they doing that?
Right. My questions as well.
I've never heard of them searching for a meteorite to fill in the ocean before.
Me neither.
But that brings up some interesting questions, doesn't it?
Right. We are lied to, or maybe not lied to, but kept information from for a long time. And, who knows? But I think our consciousness is changing, and it's due to folks like you and several others out here. And let's keep it going. Yeah.
So the way I see it, we have a couple things going on right now. If we use evidence to drive our conclusions based on, looking at the weather, looking at, like I mentioned, volcanism, the seismic activity, and all these strange magnetism changes, like I've mentioned many times, the Inuit up in northern Canada claim that the stars have shifted, and so many others say the same thing. And yet, and at the same time, we have over 40 active volcanoes at the same time right now, as well as we've had hundreds, if not thousands, of earthquakes this year alone. I'm someone who has an earthquake monitor on my phone, and it seems like it goes off with something that's above a 5.0 about every, 30 minutes to an hour. It really is.
Yeah, which app do you use? The Earthquake Alert?
Yeah, yeah, and it also has volcanoes on there too,
That's
and
what's up.
it's startling. It really is.
20 something, 21,000, 22,000 earthquakes last month. And
And some of those are major and some of those are minor, but the
right.
amount of the minor one of the major ones is really, really scary.
It's astounding.
Like we saw with Mexico City with all those the videos taken of the buildings all shaking and all the dust. I think we're only going to see that increase, and I think that anybody who lives near fault lines needs to take not run for their lives, but needs to pay attention. And I don't think it's a bad idea to have some kind of a small kit in your car or truck that just has some water and a little bit of food or something, because we're so used to this normal life where small things happen, but everyone's usually fine and we go day to day. But what happens if something more serious occurs? We need to prepare for the possibility that some a bumpy road is ahead over the next couple of years. And based on what we're seeing, we need to understand the fact that everything acts as a warning sign. So if you see swarms of earthquakes and you see volcanoes awakening that haven't awakened either within our lifetime or ever, that's a really serious warning sign to pay attention to, and it's telling you that something's coming. There's events that are coming that are going to be more drastic. Now,
how has the weather been up in you're in Maine?
it's even just in my local area. I mean, I'm someone who studies the weather all over the planet. I'm very interested in weather. It's one of my favorite topics. And besides all of the crazy weather around the world, I mean, there are so many unusual downpours and storms flooding places like in Saudi Arabia in the middle of the desert, all the way to, we just saw, I think, over 100 people die in Japan, in Hiroshima, from the flooding. We're just seeing this happen more and more and more. And I think it's directly related to the fact that our climate is going haywire. And that's why we're having these aerosol injections. And they're really worried that we're going to have major shifts that are going to be potentially irreversible. And and to be clear, I don't think that all of this is directly the cause of human behavior. I think it's naive to think about that if you look at geological records and history and how much, and I'm not going to disregard the fact that we have totally polluted and destroyed this planet. Let's not get past that. But looking at geologically, and when large volcanoes have gone off the past, bigger than we have now, they can sometimes affect the entire planet. And we need to understand that where we are right now is we're at potentially the point where more may be happening soon. And that's why I say anyone that's living near fault lines or in areas that are prone like that should just pay attention. Now, what's causing this? Well, I see it as being several factors and not just one factor. The first factor, why are they spraying and trying to spray in the upper atmosphere? Well, if anybody, you may have noticed, if you're outside, you may have thought to yourself, the sun feels a lot hotter than it used to.
Thank you.
Even just years ago. You almost can't even stand out in it when the UV is bad enough. And that's what that is relating to. It's the UV index, which is basically measuring the solar radiation that's hitting you. Okay. Now, that's where the problem comes in, because this is where I see the first factor, which is the fact that our sun is at a solar maximum, but it's entering a solar minimum. Okay. And then when you get those transitions from a maximum to a minimum, you get a huge shift. And one of those shifts is you normally get a really intense solar output, which then drastically drops, and then often cause like an ice age.
When it switches from solar maximum to solar minimum?
It's going to be sometime, I think, within the next 5 or 10 years. And why that's so worrisome is that one of the biggest factors that controls the climate on our entire planet are ocean currents. A lot of people don't realize that, okay? Now, take something like the Gulf Stream. which originates down off of Florida in the warm southern Atlantic waters in the Gulf area as well. And it moves up along the eastern United States off of North Carolina, okay? And it goes up right off of New York City, and then it shoots out in the ocean, and it heads off, and it goes by places like southern Greenland and Iceland and into the Scandinavian regions, which if the Gulf Stream, and I can explain what that is in a second, but if it didn't exist, there would essentially be much more severe cold in places like that, especially somewhere like Iceland. People would not be able to live in Iceland if the Gulf Stream didn't exist. So the Gulf Stream, what it is, it's a warm ocean current. It comes from the tropical areas, and it goes right up through in the Atlantic Ocean and cuts over into northern Europe, okay? Somewhere like Madrid, Spain is found further north than I am, and yet on average their temperatures are much hotter than I am, and that's because of the Gulf Stream. Now here's where it gets scary. The Gulf Stream is based on a delicate balance of fresh and salt water. That's the only way that Gulf Stream exists, okay? And it is what is a huge controlling factor in storms and temperature, and there's other ocean currents around the world that have similar features as well.
Correct.
And so what happens when you get a lot of ice that melts into the ocean is you get very, very dense fresh water that sits up on top. And then you get this disruption with the salt water, and it can completely shut down. It can shut down these currents and cause complete changes on even a worldwide basis. I think that one of the factors that led into the last ice age, that was 10 to 12,000 years ago, was because of these currents shutting down. Well, and of course, then over time, you can slowly develop these currents again and get back into a normal climate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, what I'm saying, that's the day after tomorrow scenario, right?
Yes, and so many people think that movie is ridiculous, right. And yet there are pieces of truth in there that are remarkable.
I think in every movie there's pieces of truth.
Yes, especially the good ones. So that's the sun, because the sun is having an impact on the temperatures that are then potentially melting the remaining ice caps that we have on the planet, okay? And then flooding that fresh water in that destabilizes. Right.
If I may interrupt for a second to add validity to what you just said, today I was reading on the Weather Channel, they had a 4-mile calving event up in Greenland. 4 billion tons of ice calved off and went into the ocean. So
that's right. I just shared that recently. I saw that too. It just shows you further activity.
It's like a train, and it's going.
Absolutely. And now we need to talk about the other factor. And the other factor is, why are we seeing so much increased volcanism and seismic activity on our planet? And how is that related? Well, I do think that the sun and all the solar radiation impact is a part of that as well. Heating up the core of the Earth. But there's other factors. And I think those other factors are relating around what's called the magnetic sphere of our planet. Okay, it's the magnetic protection around the planet that's held on each pole, okay, perfectly, so that the planet spins just right, and it's got this the right amount of energy and all these things. That is being disrupted. That's why the Inuit of northern Canada have said that the stars have shifted. So there's these complex factors are going into play, and what's causing that? Well, if you look at our solar system, the entire thing is tilted from something, okay? Some kind of outer planetary body beyond the Kuiper Belt is tilting the entire solar system. And those, even on a minute level, when you have, like you were talking about, all the planets are on this like plane of inertia, basically, where they're all balancing each other out based on gravity, and they're all functioning in this perfect, cyclonic flow, and And what's happening right now is when you add a body, a mass to that, it disrupts the entire thing. It causes friction, and it causes magnetic disruptions to all those planets, okay? And that's what I think is happening right now. I think we're seeing these combination of all these different events, which really looks plausible that it happens somewhere around every 10 to 12,000 years. And that's exactly when the last ice age ended, from all these disastrous events that happen with the wobbling of the poles that shift and then cause all these problems with tectonic plates and tsunamis. And I'm not saying that's going to necessarily happen,
Right.
But I do think that we're seeing the beginnings of potentially what could be the
Do you believe that
of our poles.
the equator was in a different position in the past, like 13,000 years ago? I mean,
Yeah, I think the poles have shifted many times.
Yeah.
And let's think about this for a second. If the poles represent where that control of the magnetic sphere of the Earth is, okay, the two poles, they act to balance it, then isn't it strange? You look back into stories like Admiral Byrd way back in the day where they were flying up over, up in the Arctic, and they saw like this enormous hole in the ice. And then these were like high-end military officials that have seen all these strange things at the poles, not to mention Antarctica, where there's all this strange stuff down there. I mean, if you look at Antarctica, you can see that the main ice shelf, there's like, areas that are named after these elite families down there, like the Rockefellers and the Rothschilds have named all these areas in Antarctica, and there's all these secret bases and all these secrets around the North and the South Pole. I think that's because they knew this was going to potentially happen long ago. And part of these black budget funds and all of this strange technology that's hidden is, I think they are making an attempt. They're saving their own butts probably, right? Not more of like the other side of looking after us. But they're making an attempt using technology to try to stabilize the poles. And I even think that's a possible way why we even see a shift. If you were going to have a shift in the poles, to me, the most likely thing you would want to do, like a seesaw, is to try to shift it the opposite way so that you could counter whatever that shift would be. And I think that's what's happening right now.
Do you think CERN may be tied into that somewhere?
CERN and HARP could even be part of this. There's so much technology that we just don't fully understand.
Probably what got Jesse kicked off the show when he started bringing that stuff to light, right? That HARP and the stuff arts and
it's really like sci-fi stuff, but it's very real.
Right.
And it's amazing. So many people don't believe in conspiracies, yet all you have to do is just search for the word HARP online, and it'll blow your mind on this facility way up in Alaska that's playing with all these different strange frequencies and all of these things. I mean, it's pretty wild stuff.
Well, don't forget the wave that they've seen over and over down in Antarctica coming off the Antarctic ice shelf. And also, I forgot what I was going to say, but yeah, that wave anomaly that a lot of truthers report on. And CERN is pretty much close to the center of our planet too, is it not? I mean,
in Switzerland, yeah. I do think that CERN may act as I think that CERN may actually even be part of some kind of a strange technological means to create a wormhole or something too.
They name every one of their programs and little parts of that machine after gods. All the gods.
And that to me is pretty wild. Right. And I want to talk about all of this and how the fact that our perception of it is based on largely, especially in the past, what we're told. So when people, they're told that everything's fine, that, we created all these things with climate change and all of these things that are going on around the world with warming, they blame it on us. It's a means to essentially block the truth, to block off what the real causes are, and the potential dangers of what's coming. Because, I mean, frankly, we know that, listen, I understand that the government needs to keep secrets, because if they told everyone things, people would freak out. Okay, I completely understand that. I'm not someone who's naive enough to not understand the social constraints that would occur if people thought that it was a chance that something really bad could happen in the next couple of years.
Correct.
That would really disrupt a lot of our society. And so I understand that secrets have been kept, but this is where we run into a problem. So many secrets have been kept for so long. Okay.
Not only secrets, lies have been told over them.
Yes, exactly. History has now become a story that's been written by the victors and is the agreed upon lie. Okay.
Nice.
And it really comes down to, and that's really difficult for a lot of people. They shake their head, and a lot of people come at this and they think, I don't even know what to believe. I've been told all these things, and it's really difficult to try to reform my brain ideas around what these associations are and what the truth is and all those things. And in the end, all I have to say to that is this path of, if you go beyond what the norm is of society, if you step out and you say to yourself, I don't care what other people think, I'm going to find out what the truth is, because I feel like I owe it to myself to want to know, because it not only does it give me knowledge, but it expands my understanding and my awareness. Okay.
Goosebumps again, man.
But synchronicity. But we have to understand that path is not easy. It's not for the faint of heart. It's a lonely road to walk, because the majority of society has this world that's been created around this illusion. Again, that's why I called the previous book The Illusion of Us. It's this illusion of reality that's been created around what should we be doing right now, and how do we perceive our existence here. Is our entire existence going to a sports event, screaming and drinking tons of beer and throwing it all over the place, and then going to a mall, and then going and driving through a city in some Lexus, and going up in our high-rise apartment? And what is that? Have we completely lost touch of everything else in the rest of our world? Right. In terms of, are we just this evolved animal who reached this point through survival of the fittest, okay? And now that we've reached this point, we have the right to treat this world and treat the people around us however we want, because we're just animals fighting to get to this place. If
I may interject for a second, the hardest part of, I think, about the whole spiritual awakening or the whole enlightening process is not just the societal pressures of you being considered crazy. It's the people around you, the people you love, your family. When I first started saying this stuff to my family, I needed to be assessed in their opinions. I had to go get checked.
I understand.
It's crazy.
Most people in my family think I'm crazy, if anybody wants to know. Luckily, I have a lot of support from some of them, though. But the majority of them think that I'm off my rocker and that I'm maybe slightly delusional. But
in the whole CIA, the whole conspiracy misnomer or dilemma, it was created by who? CIA, right?
Yeah, and isn't it brilliant, because we've gotten to this point now with our understanding and our social conditioning, you could call it, where if you believe in a conspiracy theory, you believe in all of them. Mm-hmm. And then so people get freaked out and they say, oh my God, I'm going to be lumped in with someone who's a flat earther or someone, all of these things. They've created this idea that if you believe in one conspiracy theory, one of them, it doesn't matter what it is, you might as well go put a tinfoil hat on and jump on the bandwagon of the crazies.
And that's why people get the glazed look over their eyes when you bring up the climate and in the sun and
anything.
Yeah.
Any of these things, if anything, it doesn't even matter what it is. If you say, did you know that 80% of the public drinking water in the United States has dangerous amounts of fluoride that's put into them? And that you can just simply search, and the FDA openly talks about it and how they consider it a means of helping tooth health.
Yeah, it's helping our dental.
Yeah, fluoride is a neurotoxin, is one of the most dangerous substances for a brain that you can possibly ingest. And you can just see that by go get your toothpaste bottle and go read the back of it. It says on it, if swallowed, go to the emergency room and seek medical attention immediately. Right. It's poison. Fluoride is a byproduct of the aluminum industry. Okay. It is a poison that, yes, it cleans your teeth, but it also causes severe potential for neurological damage, as well as it functions with all of these things that calcify our pineal gland and all of these things inside our body and just dumb us down. This dumb down effect, and people don't like to hear that. How could they do that to us? Oh my gosh, it's simple. It really is. Okay.
And the thing I hear is, anything like this on this kind of scale is they say that's too big of a secret to keep. There's no way.
Exactly. And I completely understand that. For someone who doesn't study this and look into it and understand the scale of it, it just seems totally crazy, right?
All you have to do is look to the information. Where do we get our information from? You know,
Yeah.
Google it.
How could governments all over the world be doing some global, geoengineering project without all the scientists and everyone knowing? It's the same thing as ancient history. It's the exact same thing. If you wanted to protect the ancient history secrets of Egypt, which is one of the most important places on our planet for secrets,
I would agree.
You simply just put the person in charge who is someone you choose. That's it. So, for instance, the person who is in charge or was for the majority of all of over 20 years of Egyptian history is Zahi Hawass. Okay, this single person has blocked almost unimaginable discoveries, and go look into all these things where they found the tomb of the birds and all of these under the Sphinx. There's pictures of Zahi Hawass himself sticking out of these tunnels, like poking out at him, looking up at him, right? And yet his answer, and the Egyptian mainstream archaeologists and scientists, they say the tunnels that they go in, they just dead end, they don't go anywhere.
Right.
Like they
I want
would
to throw an angle at you here real quick. Now, you know how thought states that it's hidden from the profane or from the average everyday Joe, the information. Maybe what if Hawass was one of those gatekeepers, of sorts.
I think it's a good thought that he could be one of those gatekeepers, but I just see him as being
I agree with
a really big jerk.
I agree with you.
I know you're saying this, but I think what Thoth is more talking about is that he is actually, I think it's him, is responsible for writing a lot of these documents in such a way where they're hidden in metaphors and symbols, okay? And then so that it's the initiated who can understand it.
Right.
And the casual person who was to try to read something like the Enuma Elish or Atrahasis or any of these things, they would try to read it and they really wouldn't understand, to be able to get the average person without studying what these terms are. They would take it for face value. Like, for instance, if you look at the Aztecs and Mayans and you look at all of the plumed serpents and dragons down there, you would say they were stupid. There was no such thing as those things back then. Why would they be creating these symbols? So that's a linear way to look at it, but that has nothing to do with it. The plumed serpent and the dragon goes back to these ancient ways, which represented knowledge, higher teachings, and even our own kundalini energy of our consciousness, okay, and our energy body. So we need to understand that a lot of this, it's been hidden so that only the initiates can understand it. And it means those who have spent the time to look at this stuff and read it and study it, to ponder it, to walk outside on a long walk, talk to themselves, try to figure out what these things mean and what the truth is for themselves. Because if you try to just regurgitate or just take something else that someone said, like me or Steve or whoever it is, you're going to be always left with more questions and not fully understanding. The path of the truth, which is what Thoth wanted all along, was that to truly understand any of this, you have to look at it yourself. It doesn't matter how much of this stuff is force-fed down someone's throat. Right. They have to spend the time and have the courage. That's another thing we really need to not disregard, is you got to have, like we said, you're going to be alone. A lot of people are going to think you're crazy because of the means and the conditioning that's gone into this for so long with so much of society that, and we're going to talk about that in a second, this perception of both reality and history and who we are has been so manipulated and it's been so altered that when you tell someone the truth and you try to go down a lot of these ancient writings and you try to discuss all these things, they look at you like you have two heads, because it's so different than what we've been told. And it almost seems impossible. But I got to tell you that this quote you got to stick in your mind that I always think of is the truth really is stranger than fiction. It's wild. It's like when you learn
what's true isn't popular, what's popular isn't true.
Yeah, and you read something like the Emerald Tablets, they'll blow your mind.
Oh man, that's my favorite piece of writing right there.
It's incredible stuff. And you mentioned having goosebumps.
Yep.
This path when you start going down it and you learn the secrets of your reality, and you start to change on an atomic level, on a conscious, energetic level.
It's funny you said that, because I recently I started asking people that aren't awake, that are thinking I'm crazy, or just everyday average people that, I just come across and I don't talk about this stuff to. Do you get goosebumps? And most of them say when I'm cold or when I'm sick,
because they have no idea what you're talking about.
Yeah, they don't.
A lot of those people you're talking to have not gone down this road of not only raising the vibration and the energy of their body and their consciousness through learning all of this,
right?
But they haven't seen all these secrets in amazing things of our ancient history that, again, you have to look at to understand. I mean, history really has been written by the victors, and whichever great empire won would usually just burn all of the records or all the things that disagreed with their mentality, and then would just write going forward their viewpoints. Now, let's talk about reality for a minute, and let's talk about our perception of reality. Okay, and now everything in reality, when you walk around outside or when you think about something, you have developed an association for that information. Okay, so if you ask someone how they feel about going out into the wilderness and immersing themselves outside, every person is going to have a certain association built into how they view that. Okay, more specifically, if you were to try to ask someone about how they feel about, say, ancient history and the secrets of the past, if they were someone who didn't study alternative theories and what the evidence really shows, and I can't emphasize that enough, they were just to go with the mainstream, they would have this associated perception of a certain version of our reality, right?
They quote from the Bible, probably.
or wherever it came from, you would think, this is this way, this is this way, and I've created this functioning model of how reality is. Okay, now largely society around our planet and our world has a very similar view of reality. And then, of course, some people would be saying, well, who are you to disagree with this large majority of viewpoint of reality? What makes you think that yours is different than what everyone else has? It comes down to this. All throughout time, if you actually study again and you look, there's been this attempt to block a lot of the events of history because they're very difficult for certain parties because of what they've done, to create this idea of where human civilizations came from, where war came from, the empire mentality, our evolutionary mentality, Darwinian mentality, all of these things. To get to this point now, we have this perceived version of reality.
Well, I just had this thought sorry for cutting you off, Matt, but when you said that they control the person, to the victor goes the storyline, right? Now, yes. Do you think that has something to do with why the serpent was vilified? And that's exactly the point. I mean, we're going to talk about the gods later and these symbols that they had. Something like the serpent and the dragon have been demonized and inverted to their opposite truths. And you want to look at why, and we're going to get into that, but something like the underworld, which really isn't bad, has been in a biblical means, in a monotheistic religion means, has been used as this term called hell. And heaven has been used this term as the opposite, right? And we think of all these angels up in heaven, this weird, spiritual place that's above us where they're all watching down and smiling. And then there's this hell realm that's all fire with all these evil beings that are below us, right? And that's completely wrong. That's a way to block off our understanding of all of this. And then, again, it has to do with our perception of reality. And now, we're going to talk about this later on because it has to do with dimensions. But basically, this is how it works. Hell, like we think of the hell realms, it's called the underworld. And it simply represents these lower dimensions, okay? This lower dimensions, inner earth, beneath the third dimension, okay? And that is actually the place where it looks like the energy and the balance of our planet is most
controlled through. Okay.
Right.
Now, we're getting the serpent is it's considered this evil Satan figure. Okay. Down in the depths. Right. And we're going to talk about that. But it's so funny when you look at the devil and the whole, the pitchfork, how you then look at something like, Poseidon with his trident, and how it's the exact same thing. It's so obvious that they've simply, certain powers that be have inverted and demonized certain aspects that they disagree with, or that they don't want to be known. And so let's get into this perception of reality and talk about this for a minute, because first of all, if you look at the complexity of human beings and you look at all of the secrets and all of the gifts that are found within us, look at the fact that scientists studying our DNA, they've given this term junk DNA for our non-coded DNA, which means that we have this sizable piece of our DNA, not percentage-wise sizable, but sizable for how it impacts us. Sometimes the smallest amounts of differences in DNA can have the biggest impacts. We have this non-coding DNA, and this is where it gets wild. The reason it's called that, and they don't talk about this ever, very, very little. Every species on the planet, in almost every capacity, shares DNA from some location and some means, except for the fact that human beings, this non-coded DNA means it's non-coded and it doesn't share with any other species on our planet. First of all, remember that. We have DNA inside us that is from somewhere else, and they don't know where it is from. That's fact number one. The second fact that is mind-blowing, that completely goes against any kind of an idea of an isolated, and that's what I want to talk about, is, we're told that Darwinism and our evolution is based on how some completely random, some planet, Earth, out in the middle of nowhere, no one around, somehow, after billions of years cooling, the right elements get in place and a lightning strike happens, and these eukaryotes and prokaryotes develop, and then somehow out of that they develop into fish and these organisms in the ocean,
Right.
oceans that then swim on the land and then become land-bearing animals, and then eventually those land-bearing animals would turn into humans. We have been so misled, because what that does, if you combine that idea with Darwinism, which is survival of the fittest, which means the only reason why any species are here now is because they were the strongest to get there. Okay?
We evolved from monkeys. Why are there still monkeys?
Yeah. And this is where it gets amazing. Think about it this way, if human beings are simply just primates, let's for a minute consider that. If we are primates, then you would see in some time in the period of human existence on this planet, you would see primates in some kind of a stage of change. Regardless of how small that change is, you would see primates, like 1 out of 100 or 1,000, whatever it is, you would see some kind of a strange
transitional missing link is what you're getting.
Oh my God. Yeah, this primate is transitioning and evolutionary changing into a human. Look, right in front of you, it's changing. No, that's never happened. It's never will happen. And we're being lied to about that. Because of this, yes, we share common DNA with primates, okay? But that's simply part of the biology of our body. Because
on Earth, everything shares like 96% of its DNA.
Yeah.
Everything.
And that's when they say that number, that's a means so people go along with that and they ignore the importance of all of those small percentages and what they can do. We got to understand it's those small percentages that make the biggest impact, okay? And so this survival of the fittest mentality makes no sense in terms of the evolutionary idea that we came out of apes, okay? Because of the fact that, number one, we don't see any apes in transition. And number two, the brain size jump in a Homo sapien is so large compared to a primate that it's impossible that it could have happened. Number two, here's some other really interesting facts. The human body is perfectly designed around these chakra energies that exist throughout our spine and throughout our body, where we're tuned to exactly mimic the visible light spectrum. And that's part of how we perceive reality. Is one of the biggest things that's not taught in school. And again,
that blew my mind.
The things we're taught in school are part of a design curriculum that goes all the way back to the Rothschilds and back to these elite families, which is how all of these secrets have been able to be controlled. This is how so much has been managed to be hidden because of certain powerful families and groups here. And we're going to talk about where those came from, because that's not random. That's the way that is.
No, and it's become severe as of late, and it's probably for what's going on. You know, they're being, I don't know, they're being made to think that things are falling apart for them, and maybe not made to think, because maybe it is falling apart, and maybe I think we're going to win this time, though, Matt. I don't know about you, but
well, we definitely are. In terms of winning, if it means the outcome is higher consciousness, we are. And so our perceptions of reality have been controlled through very interesting means. Number one, again, rewriting the events of history so that it's alternate history is ignored. Like, you know, how we perceive the conquerors of the Americas, or a lot of these heroes we think are heroes. Anything from Columbus to Pizarro, all the way to St. Patrick, right, to so many men that have done really terrible, terrible things, but we have this complete wrong perception of how we view them. Right. Like I've said in when I'm writing right now in the most recent book, most of who we think are heroes are actually the villains. It's really quite remarkable. And so the way that this was achieved is it was determined quite a while ago that because of these certain banking families that ended up taking over our planet, because our world is run on finances, okay? The financial economics run our world. You have this situation where you have these bloodline families, and I know a lot of people don't like to hear about this stuff because it's difficult for them, but this is very important for us to understand, because it represents what is going on in our world, okay? You have certain bloodline families that have taken control of the monetary system of our world under what's called the central bank. And they have then taken that central bank and had it spread throughout the entire world, except for just a couple countries, such as Syria, Iran, Iraq, all these, Libya, these countries that were then destroyed through what was
right. Anyone that we've been in war with recently has gone against the grain, and yeah, exactly.
And if there's no coincidence that's happened. It's like a slap in the face if you don't if you don't follow along with the central bank. And because that's what they're obsessed with, is controlling the monetary system of the world. If they can't, they know that everything would break down. That's how this is possible. If anybody wants to know, how do governments and how do politicians, how is all of this, in scientists, how is all of this possible to be controlled? Well, if you're a scientist or a politician that spends their entire life going down the road of being a good person, learning, going down the road of being a law-abiding citizen, spending a lot of money on schooling and getting your degree, if you were to decide to move away from the given constraints of what's pushed on people, you need to say this is what is real. If you don't say that, things will happen. That happens in our reality all the time. And why do you think so many people are getting killed? So many scientists, so many people just mysteriously end up in a river dead or commit suicide every single time. And everyone's like, oh, whatever. They had someone that cheated on them. That makes sense, or whatever. And we just accept it all. But the real dark truth behind that is that a lot of these families, like the Rothschilds and the Rockefellers and many, many, many others, they have such a control over so much of our world because of the central banking system, that they've basically put into place the emissaries for them. The politicians who are in place because of the corrupt political system, they are put into power based on money, and whoever they want to put in gets put in. And in the monetary systems, they can control everything from the military to whatever educational system is designed. All of these things are part of how we perceive our reality, and those associations that go along with them. Like, for instance, I'm going to loop around to where I started, is we're designed around the visible light spectrum. That means that our bodies and our vibrations and our chakras, we have such an incredible biological design that's perfectly matched to house this consciousness, okay? And again, that's part of how we perceive ourselves. These super beings that are stewards of this planet, not just these animals that can act the way we do. It's all part of this perception. But getting back to it, we're not even taught in school about light. Light is the visible light spectrum. What you see outside with the rainbow is literally what defines almost our entire reality here and what we see around us. And at the same time, most people are unaware that all of light in the visible light spectrum is based on simply increasing vibrational frequency, just like our chakras and our energy in our own bodies. Right. We're like gods here that don't know it. We're the children of gods, really. And that's the whole idea of why so many bad things happen to us, and why so much war and duality is on this planet, is because we're essentially these great beings who are being held in a lower state, and almost in somewhat of a slave mentality. It's an energy slavery, basically, by keeping us in a lower state. And I want to bring up how that works. If a being is in its lowest state of energy, that means their lowest vibratory state, which is what in the visible light spectrum, the lowest vibratory color is red. That's the lowest frequency, vibratory frequency that there is, okay, in the visible light spectrum. At the same time, our root chakra, our lowest state of energy, is what's called the red root chakra, okay? Fascinating. Matches the visible light of a red, which means that if a being that has all these capability that we have to reach all the way up to blue and then purple up our vibratory energetic level, if a being is kept in its lowest state through fear, through war, through our demiurges of greed and lust and all these things, if a being is kept in that state, they're essentially in like a prison of their own energy, because and that's why so many people can't understand this stuff, because they're in a lower state of energy and they simply can't connect to a higher state of consciousness and understanding, because they're being kept in this placement where they're simply unable to understand. Now
it builds that wall, and that wall
it's these walls that are built up. Exactly.
Control as well. It's
exactly
scared. You can be told what to do.
Now, where does this come in terms of dumbing people down? It's all about the keeping the physical body sick. Okay, as we get healthier, if we eat a lot of vegetables, we eat lean protein. We don't eat fast food. If you make a lot of your own meals, you try to eat healthier.
I'm in the process of doing that right now, because I can
tremendous differences inside your body. All of a sudden, your vibratory frequency of your body changes, and that's all the chakra systems are. They simply mean that you reach a higher state of vibration, and you'll notice it. All of a sudden, your mind seems very clear. Your body seems lighter than it was before, not in terms of weight, but it's in terms of how you feel. All of these things start changing within us, and that's what they don't want. Because if someone was to change their vibratory structure and start to wake up, that's what it's called, they would all of a sudden, they would look at their lives, and they would start digging in and learning about all these things. They would say, why am I working 80 or 90% of my life and then having this small amount of free time to do what I consider, my own time? And at that point, I'm so tired and spent that I just wallow and watch TV and do nothing. It's perfect, right? It's a perfect system.
That's the biggest excuse for anybody that I come at with any of this is, who's got the time for that? I got to go to work. I got to do this. I got to do that.
It's a perfect system. Yeah. And so that's what they're so worried about, because we're these energetic means of productivity for a economic outcome. We are these workers who create lots of monetary income that then goes all the way to the top, and then we feel like we're living a really happy, good life down here, whereas really the majority of most of the finances are just all going to these powerful corporations and families. And some people are living like this American dream at the expense of a lot of the places of the rest of the world where they're suffering. It's all part of this illusion and this means to keep us dumbed down. Now, the way they do that is through fluoride in water, which causes our neurological and our systems to be dumbed down. They do it through pushing bad food. Why do you think so much bad food, like trans fats? Trans fats were legal until there was public outcry, and then the FDA had to ban them. That only happened because people started gaining tons of weight and getting sick and dying and freaking out. Remember, the FDA is supposed to pass things that are safe.
Right.
And
It's
yet,
like the vaping thing. People are smoking them vapor things. Where were the trials for that? How was that?
it doesn't even matter about just that. How about cigarettes alone? The tobacco
Cigarette-
industry was being directly funded by the governments. I mean, it's insane, the fact that they know all of these things about how it can dumb people down and cause them to be sick but still productive, and they just push it. It's such a sad thing, and so many people. Some people may turn this off and say, I can't hear this. This is too difficult, but it's true, and it's the truth. And you learn more and more about. That's why the other book was called The Illusion of Us: The Suppression and Evolution of Human Consciousness, because we've had so much systematic dumbing down and reduction in our understanding of the past and what we are. We are so much more than some survival of the fittest animal here that's fighting.
Right. Did you know that the government bought the analog TV bandwidth from or sold the analog TV bandwidth to Google? Did you know that?
No, but you just brought up another amazingly important point about this whole dumbing down. Is every wireless signal, every TV signal, they're all on these very low frequency symbols, okay? Dumbing, like low vibration, just like the red root chakra, keeping us in these low states. Everywhere you go, you're bombarded by frequencies that bring you down. Now, look at the world we're in right now. The majority of people have this certain low vibration, and then everyone around them is impacted. So if you try to go down this path, again, it's path of the warrior, the path of the hero. It's called that because you not only have to try to go above the mainstream in terms of understanding and going beyond what other people are talking about and not being able to talk about a lot of common things anymore, and people know what I'm talking about, but
right.
Not only that, but you have to try to what I call hold your own energy and vibration and not have it be impacted by all the people around you. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, get to a good state where you feel clear in a high state of energy, and then go to a bar, go to somewhere where there's a lot of people and see what happens if you haven't practiced. All of a sudden, you'll feel like something's happened and you're brought down to this lower state. That's exactly how we're impacted by those around us, okay? So this entire aspect of how we view reality in the past is manipulated and is largely controlled by, like we said, those who then will say, if you believe in a conspiracy theory, you believe in all of them, and you're a tinfoil hat crazy. Whereas the reality is there's so many conspiracies and so many lies that they've been built on top of this giant sand, this sand temple of illusion that is just going to crumble because it has nothing to support itself on. Do you know what I mean?
Right. They're not just conspiracies. They're just straight out lies that have been billed as conspiracies because it's a word that'll get people to turn their head away from the truth.
Exactly. And I want to go directly into talking about ancient history because, as I said, we're given this Darwinian model, and what it says is human beings slowly became nomadic, where they started wandering around the planet and hunting and gathering, and we're given this certain timeline that says this is when human beings became civilized. This is when they were nomadic. And what I want to talk about is the fact that another one of these mind-blowing things that a truther will come across is realizing that our entire timeline is wrong. The entire thing is a lie.
Right.
It's been so manipulated that Homo sapiens and human beings are actually far older than we're told. In our current state, and if you think about where we are consciously and physically in terms of where we are right here, we've been at this place largely for well over 100,000 years. Whereas right now, if you look at what's told in school, we're told that 10,000 or 11,000 years ago, human beings across the earth were only nomadic hunters and gatherers, okay? Right. And then around 5,000 years ago, we became civilized people, okay? Now this is where it gets mind-blowing. On the screen, I have something called Göbekli Tepe, okay, which is found in Turkey. And it's this ancient site that's being uncovered right now, and they're going down into it, which, by the way, was deliberately buried. And that's something a really interesting concept to think about, is that a lot of these ancient sites were literally deliberately buried so that Because what happens if they weren't? What if these cultures, what if they knew that this stuff was being targeted by armies and empires, and they knew that it was going to be destroyed? The only means to hide it would be to bury it, so that long in the future, once civilization became more moral and was more open, they could look at this and understand it. And what's so important about this site, along with many other sites in Mesopotamia, is that it's been carbon dated to like 11,000 years old almost. Okay. And why is that important? Well, it has sophisticated monolithic building with all kinds of knowledge that is shared by other ancient sites around the world, first of all. Okay. And second of all, it would be impossible that you would have a nomadic, think about this for a minute. If you had a hunter and gatherer society at that time that was passing through, and they say, okay, let's stop here for a year, 2 years, 10 years, 20 years, whatever, and let's just make the most incredible monolithic site that's in tuned in with the stars and has all these constellation connections and all this stuff. Let's do that for no reason, right? And then we'll just move on. It doesn't make any logical sense. Try to wrap your head around that for a second.
That's a good point. I never thought of it that way.
And think for yourself, why would hunter-gatherer civilizations or cultures take any time, or first of all, where would they get any of that knowledge? It makes no sense that they could travel around hunter and gatherers and have vast knowledge of all of these things out of nowhere, okay? But that's where we want to get into this, is the fact that these were absolutely not hunter and gatherers. Nomadic tribes, you'd have to go so much further back to find those, okay? Because the way it worked is you had human civilizations that were either influenced by something or they weren't. Mm-hmm. I completely understand an isolated tribe somewhere in the Amazon or in Africa somewhere who didn't get any outside influence. And we're going to talk about where those influences came from, who wouldn't have this knowledge. But what about all those places that do? Where did it come from? And on the right side, I have an image of what's called the Sumerian king list. And it is one of the most important cuneiform tablets that we have of all. Because the Sumerian king list, it starts by saying that kingship was lowered from heaven. And we were talking earlier what heaven is. It's simply higher dimensions, okay? Heaven, where these beings from above came down. That's what all of these, if you go back to the most ancient cultures on the world, everything from the Hopi all the way to the Sumerians, they all say the same thing, that beings from heaven or above came to them and they gave them knowledge and information, okay? Or beings that were here influenced them that just arrived from nowhere, maybe on a boat, whatever it was. There was influence every single time, okay? From if you want to talk about the Americas, from the Southwest, the Anasazi and the Pueblo and the Hopi, down through the Aztec, Mayan, all the way to the Inca. I don't care which one of them it is. They were all influenced from common sources. And that's why we see this common symbolism that's shared in places like the Americas, that's separated by 1,000 miles of ocean to across the world to other places, because of the fact that there were common influences. Okay. Now in the Sumerian king list, it very clearly talks about how there were these two defined moments in our history. And those are what are called the antediluvian and post-diluvian time periods. Now, antediluvian or pre-diluvian basically means before the biblical flood and after. And those terms are very important to understand, because it basically has to do with why so many sophisticated civilizations existed before that, and why so many were wiped out after, and how we have amnesia of so much of this information, okay? And I've done so many shows talking about this, so I'm not going to get into it in too much detail. But basically, if you look at geological records like ice core samples from Greenland, and you look at ancient cuneiform writings like the Atrahasis, they extensively, and the Epic of Gilgamesh too, they extensively talk about this flood that occurred from both disturbances to our planet and the rapid melting of the last ice age that caused such a tremendous flood across different parts of the earth at different times that it wiped out entire advanced civilizations, where they basically either buried them or they were covered up in mountains of mud and were then lost essentially the time. Okay. Now in the Sumerian king list, they talk about how kingship was first lowered into ancient Mesopotamia and Eridu area. But we're talking about way before the flood. We're talking about civilizations that were existed before 12,000 years ago in Sumer, okay?
Back 400,000 years, doesn't it go, or 250,000 years, that king's list?
That's what I'm saying, more than 12,000 years. It goes back potentially over 100,000 years of history that we've lost, okay? And these are ancient cities that were then wiped out, completely wiped out, to now where you can barely even see anything left of them because they're so ancient. And they all talk about this flood that occurred that wiped them out. But what the Sumerian king list says is so important is it actually mentions the reigns of all of these kings before the flood and how long they lived and how long their reigns were for, and how human beings were very different back then. They lived a lot longer, all these different aspects, okay? And a lot of those figures like Zayasudra, who we see as Noah, they were just simply these names of kings back then that recorded these events by other people and other kings that told them the story, and they recorded it down, and it was their version. It's called the Epic of Atrahasis or the Epic of Gilgamesh because those were both kings. Atrahasis is the name of Zayasudra, who was Noah. They're just different names used in different cultures.
Was Noah the son of Enki?
Yes, and that's why he was someone who was helped and assisted during that time. Now, what the Sumerian king list says that's so important after that is it says after the flood, kingship was then lowered to the city of Kish. So now you see this restarting of civilizations in Mesopotamia after. And Kish is a city that was in the ancient Iraq, Syria area, okay? So that's the kind of mentality we got to look at. These
Which
different
side of our paradigm got lowered the second time after the...
Now, after the flood and the events occurred, there was empires that developed that turned into great war empires. And there was certain interests that were formed, whereas because of the events that occurred in the past were so bad, and I mean because of the decisions made too, in terms of something like this event could have been even orchestrated, or they knew it was coming. And by they, we're going to talk about who they are in a minute. But to think that you could want to wipe out this experiment of humanity on Earth is really, really scary. And that's what the Atrahasis talks about, is that this experiment of humanity that's here, this combination of primate and godly DNA that created us, this experiment got out of control, and some of these great beings didn't want us here anymore. They felt like they had the right to destroy us. And that's where you get the beginnings of some of this being held back. Okay. And that's another idea of how this perception of reality is so altered, because we're told that war and all these things are simply leftover evolutionary aspects of who we are. And that's partly true. They're what are called demiurges, these early aspects of us, but it's more or less that those lower aspects are preyed upon and they're pushed out in us. So that's why we're called children still by these, like Thoth calls us children of men, because we're not really what we should be yet. We're still living in this lower state where we're controlled by fear and all these lower states of energy. Okay. And that's where I wanted to get into who these gods were and where all of this came from. Now you're looking at the city of Nineveh, which is an ancient city in what is now Syria. Okay. Which has largely been destroyed, by the way, by ISIS.
Isn't that coincidence? Yeah.
Oh my gosh! All these sites, Palmyra, all these sites have been destroyed.
They name the entities that are doing all the bad stuff ISIS.
That's right. The name ISIS comes from an ancient Egyptian god of Isis, which can be connected back to Sumer and Mesopotamia as Ninmah or Ninharsag. Okay, which was actually a fertility goddess and a goddess of, consciousness and the higher self, basically. Okay. Now, this is where it gets, in my opinion, really fascinating, because if you look back into how all these sites have been destroyed, like for instance, the city of Nineveh had a library called the Ashurbanipal Library, which had all these cuneiform writings that had been amassed by kings and I'll talk about that in a minute, that have been there previous. And then when you see this change of structure of governing, whereas some empire will come in, they just destroy everything, okay? And people say, okay, well, that's just the way it is. But is it? Why are all these things constantly being destroyed? You go up to the Roman Empire.
Alexandria, right?
They were riding around, burning and destroying anything that connected to a non-Christian, the Christian monotheistic religion they took control and created. And because it's originally based on this ancient Gnostic pagan old religion, it was called, which was a spirituality connection to the higher self. And Thoth talks about that all the time. Mm-hmm. And so what I want to show here is called, we're looking at Nineveh, and I want to talk about King Hammurabi for a minute, okay? Because if you look at all of these bloodline kings that have existed, especially in Mesopotamia, they all have this common lineage, this common connection that can occur. It's not simply some king that rises up into power because of a random vote or whatever it is through the people. Go back to ancient Egypt, go back to Sumer, go back to any of these places, you're going to see that all of these kings are part of ancient bloodline families. And that continues to this day. It's scary. Right. It absolutely does. All the way up, looking at the Rothschilds, look at the royal family with this marriage that just occurred. Why do you think they were so pissed about that? Because she was non-royal blood. Outsider. And they are obsessed with royal blood. What are bloodlines? Why would you obsess around royal bloodlines? Well, there's different versions of our DNA, and human beings are not the same as they used to be. And there's certain understanding that some of these old bloodlines that go all the way back are superior in their mind. Okay. Mm-hmm. And so the less superior bloodlines are then considered, lower people. They're not as important. And that's why these bloodline families intermarry and all these things, because of the fact they're willing to have incest, which is very frequent, simply because they're obsessed with protecting a bloodline. They would rather have incest than to bring an outside bloodline in to what they call contaminating the bloodline. Now, this goes all the way back to what I said, these early kings. Now, King Hammurabi is an example of this. And what you can see right there is called the Code of Hammurabi. And why am I mentioning this? Well, I'm proving and discussing the fact that the influences that have led to these bloodlines and the empire building and war and everything we see, and even laws and all these things, were simply influences from the outside, influences that came here from heaven, which is simply higher dimensions. And I'll mention who those are in a minute, but I want to mention this because the Code of Hammurabi is a 7.5-foot tall stela that has cuneiform writing all across it. And what it basically is this this description of what those laws are. And at the top it shows King Hammurabi on the left, and on the right you have one of these really common figures that if anyone looks into what the gods supposedly looked like or whatever these beings were, they always have the same look, this horned helmet with this great beard and this long outfit, and they're always really tall. What happens if that person sitting in the chair stood up? How tall would they be if they stood up? And that's the common theme you find every time. That being you see up there is named Shamash, and it's one of the sun gods. Okay, it's a solar deity god. Now, what does that matter? That sounds crazy, right? Well, not so crazy, because King Hammurabi himself, one of the great kings of that era, he has. In the preface, I want to read what it states, okay? In the preface before it goes over all these moral laws, they're basically moral laws to live by on our planet. Again, kingship. I want you to get this idea of kingship and where the format in our entire reality and the laws, everything, where did it come from, right? Well, this is where we're gonna there's clues that are mentioned right in here. King Hammurabi says right at the beginning, and I love this quote. He says, Anu in Bel, called by name me, Hammurabi, the exalted prince, who feared God, to bring about the rule of righteousness to the land, to destroy the wicked and the evildoers, so that the strong should not harm the weak, so that I should rule over the people like Shamash and enlighten the land to further the well-being of mankind. Now, some might not see much in that, except what about what he first said right away at the beginning? Anu and Bel, called by name me, Hammurabi. Well, who are those beings? Are they real? Or are they just some, are these gods that are shared throughout everything from the Sumerians to the Greeks all the way to the Aztecs and Mayans? Are these all just somehow created, you know, ideas represented the forces of nature and our own aspects of our expression? I really have come to the conclusion they're not. They're far more than just that, because of the fact that they're shared traits throughout their names and who they are all across the world in nearly every single culture from what I just mentioned. Now, Anu is, where does this name Anunnaki come from? It comes from Anu. Okay, Anu is this great celestial, basically God leader. He's supposed to be this primordial, you know, eternal being that is ancient, who is basically was the beginning of where a lot of these, or can go back to some of the early origins of where a lot of these beings came from. And it's this.
He was ranked 60 in the
yes.
in of gods, right?
They had this royal rank, and it was called the Royal Anunnaki, and it's actually called the Council of 12 too, and it's
Wow,
named in the Hebrew Bible as the Elohim, and they're basically this royal bloodline. Again, that's where these, it's just like emissaries as above and so below. It's this reflection of their structure and their governing that's down on our world. Kingship lowered. That's what kingship is. It's this idea where certain bloodlines and certain higher up important beings rule over everyone else. Think about that. That's right. Just like we have today.
The rule because of who you are.
The more people you have involved in a governing system, the more balanced it's going to be, because the more voices can discuss things. When you have a kingship model, it's almost always a very controlling, corrupt model, because you have one person that can literally decide everything. And oftentimes their own ego will take over, and they'll think they're better, and they'll turn into this idea where they think that they're almost a god, and that they'll emanate the gods, or trying to be better. All these things occur. But again, that's where I want to get back to who these beings are, because they have this royal bloodline structure where if you read in the Bible this term Nephilim, and this idea that, so if these beings came down and interbred with humans, they were like cast down as these you know, these angels that were cast down to earth. That's where that comes in.
The fallen angels.
Yes, these fallen angels that were thrown down to earth, the third dimension of reality, because of the fact that they interbred and they mixed their genetics. And that was considered, just like we see today, it's considered this completely off limits, you know, horrible thing that they could do. And so Anu is this great, he's not great. Well, he's this leader of all of them. Okay, this royal leader. And Bel was this Babylonian name given, who had many names. And that's one of the things I really want to strongly emphasize, is that a lot of these beings, based on not only the incarnations they would make into people, but the names across cultures would change and be found throughout. Like, for instance, Bel, if you do a little research and find out who Bel was Marduk, who was the chief solar deity of Babylon. Okay. And Babylon was who Hammurabi was the king of. You see how that connects? It's not a random thing. Marduk, whose Bel happens to be the solar deity god, who basically was in charge of the Babylonian Empire. Whereas up in you go to Ashur, and you go to the Assyrian empires, and you say, who is Ashur? It's simply Enlil. And you find out that both of them are rivals, and that's why you saw these Assyrian empire battles back and forth between Babylon and Nineveh and all these things, because you're seeing, if you were an advanced being, and you're playing the role of gods here, you would want your culture, your human culture, to be the greatest, to be conquering over all the others. And that's what happens. That's why you see this empire fighting all across the world. Okay.
Well, evidence of that fighting could be the glass found in the desert, right? I mean,
And that's something we haven't even brought up, is the fact that be way before we're talking be way before the antediluvial period, before the flood, is there's cuneiform writings that talk about how there may have even been wars, like actual nuclear weapons used.
Yep.
As insane as that sound, way back to, because some of these gods were out of control and they were fighting for control of our world and these civilizations, and they were and that may have been one of the reasons why this very unstable dark world was then destroyed, and then a new world was created. The new world was this world that came out of the flood. Okay, now, and I just mentioned Anu and Marduk. Okay, on the left is Anu and on the right is Marduk, and what's really interesting about this is Marduk represents what I would call the younger generation gods, okay? And Anu and Enlil and some of these other ones, they represent these older generation gods. And one of the things that is the conflicts that's been occurring on this planet is that these younger generation gods have been trying to fight over control of basically our world and take control over these older generation gods. And what I see the outcome of that being is really sinister wars, where just so much bloodshed and so many dark means were used because of a lack of respect and a lack of understanding. Some of these younger gods, I don't think really fully incorporated their decisions in how they were ruling certain civilizations, to the fact that some of them went down pretty dark paths. Okay, is what I'm essentially saying. And
those are the dark brothers of the fight between the light and the dark.
Yeah, like Thoth mentions how there's a dark brotherhood. There's this side where some of these beings, which I completely believe are, again, I want to separate the fact that these Anunnaki, these gods, these beings, I don't think they just, it's not, don't get past the idea of some third dimensional being that travels here in this giant spaceship and comes down and is like, I don't think it's like that. These are trans-dimensional beings that may be from even another galaxy or even another universe. It's wild when you start getting into looking at who these beings were, and the fact that they're, first of all, they've reached a point where they're eternal, and they may be even, some of them may have lifespans that are literally over 1 million years.
Well, that's not that right there describes the crazy stuff we see in the sky. There's a lot of sky watchers out there that film the sky. A lot of them.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying all of them are right or any of them are wrong. I'm just saying the stuff that is being seen in the sky is just outrageous.
And I think some of that is to do with secret technology from even our own governments.
Correct.
Because if you had, why don't we see these gods here anymore, right? Where are they? Well, it's essentially this world that's been quarantined off until humanity can reach a higher state of consciousness. That's how I see it. We've had so many lies and so many, in so much war that it's caused the entire human society in our world to exist in such a low vibratory frequency, such a low state of fear and information, that if we were to learn the truth so fast, people would freak out. If we were to learn the real reality that exists around us, you'd have mass suicides. People wouldn't even be able to handle it because of how straightforward and boring the reality that is given to us, where the reality is given is that we're all alone. There's no one here. We got here, survival of the fittest. We're just fighting to get here, and that everything is based on our own means. And I think that's completely wrong. But if someone learned the other side of that,
we're gonna die alone. And
yeah, exactly. And that's the other thing. We're gonna die alone, and our life, YOLO. We only live once. Whereas our actual consciousness and spirit is eternal, and then we're just experiencing a mortal physical reality here in this body. Okay, and this is all how we perceive reality and how we perceive everything around us. Mm-hmm. And so if you had any number of extraterrestrial civilizations, I don't care how many you want to make a number of, if they wouldn't just show themselves because of how much they understand the psychology of what's gone on here with the human race, right? So essentially, it would be so easy to just simply have something not be seen in the visible light spectrum because of how limited our perception is to this reality. You could have something out there, whether it's a craft or whatever it is, that could remain largely invisible just simply because of how limited our perception is, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's how it works. I think that our perception is so limited that there's so much out there. We're not alone, and it's so much around us, even in our solar system. Why do you think we go to the moon in 1969, or at least visit that area, and then never go back ever again? And all the astronauts are saying they saw weird structures and all this stuff up there. You think that that's a coincidence? What better place would you have to monitor our world and our human civilization than some tidal locked large moon that never shows its dark side? I mean, that's
Hallelujah.
you know what I mean? So and this is another thing I want to bring up, is the fact that if you read the Gnostics, if you read the Nag Hammadi writings, they talk about these rulers of our reality and these beings that have created the idea where our demiurges are preyed upon. Okay, actually, the Gnostics directly mention Yahweh as being one of these perpetrators of our demiurges. And if you look at Yahweh, you look at this God in the modern Bible, you see such strong connections back to Enlil, and the idea that these beings would want to try to play the role of gods to us, so that they could try to have us ignore the fact that there is a creator of everything. You can see it through the mathematics of the entire, which is the language of the universe. You can see it through the Fibonacci sequence and the spiral, how everything is perfectly designed, how everything in nature is connected to this web that's far beyond something that could be random, right? And so what do? They play the role of gods here so that they can try to confuse us and think that whatever this being up in the sky that's up in the clouds is, he's a fair God who still allows war and terrible things to occur on this planet. Whereas the opposite is really true. Whereas some of these
God-fearing person.
Yeah. Whereas some of these beings have literally brought duality to our reality. Meaning, if we were left to our own means, let's say they genetically jump-started us and left us here. There you go. We would never have gone down this path of huge empires building up and fighting each other. That is a creation of our duality to keep us enslaved and to keep us fighting over each other. It's all about dividing. Because if you think about it this way, we have this planet right now that exists in our solar system, which is part of millions of other solar systems, okay, in our Milky Way galaxy alone, which is part of billions of other galaxies in the known universe, right? And yet, here we are on this planet with all of these countries divided, all fighting over each other. It's such a ridiculous, frivolous thing to think that you have a boundary that's based on nothing, right? If you go up to, between the boundary of the United States and Canada, you go up to somewhere like, north of Montana or whatever, you're talking about a boundary that's just a line of trees that have been cleared through the woods. Mm-hmm. These are not real. There are ways to divide other places so that they can fight against each other and compete against each other. Whereas, think about this. What would happen if you had a world where, and I'm not talking about a one world government, but I'm talking about a collaboration of scientists and minds from all over the world that came together? How fast would we progress as a species instead of competing against one another? What if we had some kind of a collaboration? It would be, like you said
earlier, the parroting of the scientific hyperbole that just keeps getting recycled, and you unless you repeat it, you're not getting a degree, and it just keeps us in that.
Exactly.
Pattern. So yeah.
Think for a minute, how is this information all controlled? If someone spends their life going to school, you think they're really going to or a doctor, from a doctor to a scientist, whatever it is, you think they're really going to throw it all the way to try to do this? And that's why I mentioned the Atrahasis, the Sumerian king list. I'm going to talk about the legend of Atanya in a second. All of these cuneiform writings, they never get talked about by the experts. You never see it on TV. You never see some Assyrian expert trying to decipher what it says. Why? Because they can't explain it. There's what's contained in those cuneiform writings and a lot of these other things that don't get talked about and nobody's ever heard of. it completely contradicts what this mainstream view is. And that's all you do. You just, it's really, really amazing. If you were to try to look up, like the human English is part, the Anunnaki English is part of 7 tablets. And if you were to try to go look at the 6th tablet, in my opinion, is the most important. And yet the 6th tablet is the hardest to find a translation for. That's not a coincidence, okay? That happens to be the one that mentions human origins, and yet you can't even find it in some universities. They only have 1 through 5. To me, it's very telling. The more and more I see all this stuff around the world, things being hidden, things not being talked about, like the Vatican archives. They have stolen so many artifacts from not only of the Americas and the Aztec and the Mayan, but they've stolen it from Mesopotamia. And there's entire underground vaults of information down there. There was even there was a story the other day about how the Vatican wanted to release some new biblical information that might alter some of the way we view things. Why do they have that down there? Why are they hiding that?
Right, and the reason why they're going to release it now is either because it's going to come out anyway,
exactly,
or they're trying to confuse us even more, or keep us on this side of the track.
That's right.
Something's really going on over here.
That's why the new Pope is trying to open up to the idea of being more connected,
right,
to the stars, and being a little bit. It's a way where they know religion was going to crumble when the truth comes out.
Why does the Vatican have a telescope called Lucifer?
That's right. You think that's a coincidence?
Right.
So, all of this is moving towards what you call a soft disclosure. A soft disclosure, and we can get into that in a second. But I want to talk about how the symbolism that's carried all over the world. Okay, and I have some images of eagles and dragons and various things like that. Okay, I want everyone to look into the legend of Atanya. Okay, Atanya was a king out of Mesopotamia, first of all, and just like Atrahasis and Gilgamesh, they told a story. They told a story that was heavily kept in metaphorical form. And what it says is very, very important. And it's echoed by many, many other things, including the Emerald Tablets and other cuneiform records as well. But essentially what the legend of Atanya is it has this story of talking about how there's a serpent and an eagle. And the serpent and the eagle come together, and the serpent decides to trust the eagle, and the eagle betrays it and forces it into the underworld. Okay, you can read. I'm gonna. In fact, this is something I'm gonna be covering in the next book extensively. But it talks about how to me, it's the earliest representation besides the Garden of Eden story where you can connect back to the eagle and the serpent. And of course, the Garden of Eden story, you had the serpent, but instead of the eagle, you had the God figure. It's the same thing. And what that means is this royal Anunnaki Council of 12. You have a great divide between the two of them. About half of them are of the mentality that the human experiment is a waste of time and it's been a disaster. And a lot of them would want to keep us in our demiurges in war to never reach a higher state because they're truly scared that because we have their gifts and more in some cases that we may exceed someday, become greater than them and literally become creator gods of our reality. How does that work? Well, we're going to talk about dimensions in reality in a second. But we literally are the ones who are manifesting and creating this reality. So they influence kings and events on our world, but then we manifest that reality. That's how this works. So in the legend of Atanya, this serpent figure, which you can look into being Ea, who was called Enki later, he was forced and tricked by Enlil, who is a higher rank than him, to have to go down to the underworld and control it. So right there, it's this very interesting aspect where we consider underworld is considered hell right now in modern religion, whereas some of these beings, these positive beings like Enki and Thoth, they were forced to reside in the underworld because they were supposed to balance the energy grid and
flower of life,
like the duality on Earth, kind of. Okay. Now on the other side, the eagles. It says the eagle tricked the snake and went to reside in heaven with the other gods, basically. Okay. And who that eagle is basically Enki's half brother Enlil. Okay, who is known by the Greeks as Zeus and Ashur and many, many other names. And they have the whole mentality behind them is them and many of the sons and daughters and wives they've had are all part of this competing aspect of where human civilizations in our timeline go. And so what that tells you is some of these war gods, some of these controlling gods ended up residing in the upper dimensions, and the upper dimensions are what control the events that occur in the lower dimension, the third dimension of Earth, okay? They basically manifest as above, so below. They are the ones that are the major influences on what happens here, okay? Meanwhile, some of these positive gods, like Enki, are forced to reside in the underworld and simply control balance down there, and yet they're the ones who are inverted as like being Satan and hell and the evil ones. Right. So it's the complete opposite. But I want to throw one caveat out there. There are negative beings that do exist in the underworld. Okay. But I think that's largely why some of these positive ones exist there too, for a balancing purpose. Okay. Now, So they essentially kept the world, they kept through war and demiurges, keep the eagle, the mighty eagle, look all across the world at flags and crests from the United States, which the founding fathers did not want an eagle, they wanted a turkey. And that's the thing I don't want anyone to be upset about. The United States is based on the founding of wonderful conscious principles of free speech in a society that was supposed to be like a new Atlantis almost, okay? But it became corrupted. And that's a common thing you find all across civilizations like the Aztec. Right. It's this later corruption and then most people can't see those two differences. And they then say, okay, how could you have a highly conscious culture like the Mayans that then do blood sacrifice and war? Well, they were corrupted. And that's something that I talk about a lot, is there's this competition to then corrupt them. And that's what happened in the United States. That's why the Nazis have an eagle. That's why the Romans had an eagle. That's why the Spanish conquerors had an eagle. You think that's all a coincidence that human civilizations all over the world that were war empires would somehow have the same image, which the eagle is what is called a war eagle, okay? And it represents seeing everything from above and being aware of everything, looking down upon us. Whereas the serpent is about, number one, it's about Kundalini and our higher state of energy. And it's also about balance in the earth, okay? That's one of the reasons why you have this conflict. So now let's go into dimensions for a minute, because this is what makes up the fabric of reality. I mentioned heaven, I mentioned the underworld, hell, and I mentioned the third dimension. Okay. The reason why my next book is called The Stage of Time is because the third dimension, which is where we largely exist in, that's what we walk around in. When you walk on the ground and you touch something, that's the third dimension. That is actually physical for us to perceive, but really is non-physical in terms of just being simply vibrations, okay? But we have to perceive it we have to perceive it as a physical world because we are here as a physical mortal being. So think of us as being a non-physical multi-consciousness energy that's housed like an antenna in a physical avatar body, that the way that it becomes more in tune with itself is becoming healthier, because it's like it's the antenna becoming more and more tuned. And as someone becomes sicker in a lower vibration, it simply is like that antenna almost ceasing to function. And when someone thinks of the higher self and merging with consciousness, it represents someone with their physical body understanding that this is not who they are, but their consciousness is who they are, and this is just the vessel to house them here. Once they do that, what's called merging with their higher self, higher consciousness, and they then go from existing in purely a third dimensional existence, which is all about awareness. That's all dimensions are. They're levels of awareness and understanding your place. Like you can never have an animal understand anything past their dimension they live in, because they don't have the capacity to be able to. Through consciousness and awareness and understanding, you were able to break out of just what the Egyptians called Ka, which was the illusion of the third dimensional world, okay? So if you merge with your higher consciousness, you'll start to see some really interesting things happen. One, you no longer feel as weighted down by your body. You feel more of a combination of your higher self and your body. And what you're doing is essentially you're bridging the gap from the third dimension into the fourth and the fifth, because that's where consciousness resides from. You're now tuning into these higher dimensional states. Now, if these beings exist in higher dimensions, and they don't want, some of them don't want us to reach a higher state, because then we become creator gods, right? That's what happens when you leave the third dimension. Human beings have so much power and energy that we literally are the creator gods here. And if we ascend past the third dimension, we become the ones that are in charge of our reality, not them. And that's what they're so worried about. That's why there's so many things that dumb us down. You know, so much sugar and so many bad foods to calcify our pineal gland, which was known as the third eye, this aspect of our antenna and this wide eye being open to see all. That all has to do with simply just a higher vibration and understanding and merging with your consciousness, okay? So if you think about it this way, if it's as above, so below, whatever happens in the higher dimensions is then manifested in this third dimensional reality. And there are also lower dimensions below us, okay? And everything is being played out in this sandwich of our third dimension, which is where we reside. That's why our timeline is so important to so many beings, and so much is being fought over, because this is where reality is defined, here in our third dimension. And that's why it matters so much where we go and what state we reach. Okay.
When you say that defined, what do you mean? Defined to us or defined to them, to the higher dimension of being?
It matters to them what happens here. Okay. The third dimension is where matter is physical. Okay. So therefore, to make real changes on a physical level, remember, just because there are dimensions and everything exists on a vibratory level, the physical third dimension is extremely important. In fact, if you had an asteroid strike and hit a planet and destroy it, that's a physical thing. That's a physical outcome. That's why the physical world matters, the third dimension, 3D. That's why it matters so much what happens here. And that's why if we're a body, think about this for a minute, if we're just a vessel that houses our consciousness like an antenna, then that's why these beings genetically manipulated us so that we were like them, so that they would have the ability to incarnate into us and then take on certain roles. That's why these Anunnaki transdimensional gods, beings, that's why they have so many names and so many cultures and have taken on different roles. Look at Ninshita Thoth. He has incarnated into all kinds of different people, like Hermes and Enoch and many others.
What do you think? You think maybe he incarnated as Jesus too, or? And
that's a tricky area to talk about.
Tricky because of the social stigma that.
Yeah, so I think the teachings of Jesus are based on this Gnostic Enoch Thoth perspective. Okay, this early ancient, this was what was called the ancient religion that occurred before. Right. But I do think there's a lot of trickery being used right now with a combination of probably Enlil, Marduk,
with Yahweh connection.
Well, all Yahweh is Enlil, with this idea of trying to create this this God Christ aspect here that's saving us and sacrificing everything for us, right. Everything here for us, and ignoring the fact that both of those beings playing those roles they're not anything to do with the creator and the source, prime creator, right. Whatever you want to call it. They're simply holding us back by keeping us in this false illusion of what's real, right? And as we move on, we said a lot of really negative things there. We said a lot of really dark, really troublesome things there. But this is where it gets really. Let's go through a really positive side of this.
Let's do this.
The Mayans had what's called a long count. Okay, and the Mayans and the Aztec, they had these gods. The Mayans had the god known as Kukulkan, and the Aztec had the god known as Quetzalcoatl. And if you look, they were both plumed serpent gods and the exact same mentality. And they all say that the reason why Cortez was able to conquer the Aztec was because he was a Caucasian bearded man, right? Well, they don't have any facial hair in Mesoamerica. Okay, so the reason I'm saying that is because when the Aztecs describe who their god Quetzalcoatl was, they not only describe him as being a plumed serpent god, which is more of a metaphorical thing, okay? Mm-hmm. They describe him as being a long, white-haired old man, okay? And you'll see that reference all the way across the world, all the way to Mesopotamia with Shamash. All these connections back to these these different incarnations of these beings that are playing different roles. And all they're simply trying to do is influence cultures in certain ways. And they're having competition towards that to influence, okay? Now, the Mayans,
right?
The Mayans were one of the most important cultures in the world because they received certain knowledge that discussed the idea of what's coming ahead and what's coming ahead for us energetically. The reason why they were talking about the end of the world as we know it in 2012, it was because it was the end of what was called the old world. The old world, the old vibration, the old vibratory structure of our world before. And what they talked about is they knew that we were going through these certain states of vibration because of two things. One, what zodiacal house we're entering in. Because remember, our solar system and our galaxy are traveling all the time, always moving, no matter what.
60 years, I think we switch zodiacal houses.
And then the other factor is that we're reaching our galactic center. Now, the Mayan long count, and the reason they had all this understanding, if you go to Chichen Itza and you look at Kukulkan's temple, the 9 levels represent these 9 stages of human consciousness, and we're reaching what's called universal consciousness. It's no coincidence that so many people around the world are just waking up. You know, Joe that you've known all your life, all of a sudden one day he comes to you and his mind is blown because he just looked through some stuff that he never looked at, and he becomes a completely different person. And the other friends are like, "Wow, Joe's become really weird, huh?" And they're like, "Yeah, Joe's really strange." But Joe is going through a transition where Joe is becoming awake, and Joe is part of what the Mayans talked about. Whereas, just because we're reaching a higher vibratory state does not mean everyone is going to jump into that same vibration right away. Right. A lot of people, because of how our demiurges are preyed upon, they're going to be kept in a lower state. Whereas this trickling effect where more and more and more people are waking up all the time. There's millions of people across the planet right now.
Well, that's the monkey effect, right?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Whereas you don't need the entire population to shift. You just need a certain percentage of that population to shift to then have an effect where it all follows suit right after. Right. Now, the Mayans knew that we were entering this galactic center in the time of Aquarius. Now, the way that these Anunnaki beings play the role of duality, which what kind of energy and what kind of outcome is going to exist on that world? Is it going to be a world that is ruled by a higher state of consciousness and higher vibration, or is it going to be a world ruled by war and what you call a negative duality? So duality means, is it a negative or a positive energy? Okay. Remember, they created that here, and they determined that here too. So this is where it gets really amazing. If you look at the last 2 zodiacal periods, the last one we just had was Pisces. The last 2 zodiacal periods were both negative duality. And the only reason Pisces was negative was because certain gods like Marduk stole that zodiacal house. And instead of balancing it like it's supposed to, we ended up having 2 entire zodiacal periods be negative. And that has caused insurmountable damage to our species.
Well, you add to that too, all the priests, high priests and everything wear the fish hat.
Yeah, and that just directly goes back to the Pisces and the mitre hat that was worn way back. And it's all connected. So, but this is what's really amazing about this. Because you have 2 periods of duality, these beings must adhere to balance. Okay? I want to repeat that. They have to follow balance. Because they had 2 periods where it wasn't balanced, I actually think that was allowed because of how positive Aquarius is going to be. So it's almost like they were allowed to have such a negative time period to balance how positive what's about to happen is. Okay? And they knew the amount of energy that existed at the galactic center was going to be so much that it's going to essentially lead to this time of what's called the golden age.
Okay? And what you're talking about here, just to be clear, is the precessional wobble, the great year, the long counter, the 25,920 year great year, right?
Yeah, as we move, and because we're always moving in like the spinning formation with our stars around the sun, we're moving, right, and we're moving into that galactic center, and the Mayans knew that. Right now, I've heard some really accurate, I think, reports that in estimates that 2025 we're actually going to be fully in Aquarius. That's not very long from now. Think about how close that is right now. Okay,
that's 7 years, Matt.
And now think about how much chaos. How much chaos is going on. If you have an empire collapsing, what happens? They just destroy everything. because they're dying, and it's usually it's the way that it's like a way to keep them afloat. So they have to go to these means where, why do you think the military industrial complex we were warned about by Eisenhower and Truman and all of these past presidents, JFK, they all warned us of this building military industrial complex, because it's part of this idea where these empires wanted to control our world with war, and we at the same time people were starting to wake up. And so you have to, and I know a lot of people don't like this, but if you don't have war, you have to create it. And largely these wars we have on Earth have been a creation of these central banking families like the Rothschilds.
There's always got to be an enemy.
To fund both sides, because they have to keep this war mentality of keeping us in a certain state. And what's happening right now, you're seeing every possible attempt by the powers that be to try to start World War III, and the population is rejecting it.
Right, like the Korean thing.
I love it right now. You and I and all of those other truthers that are out there, all of us are part of this impact where we're having this collective change where people, and you don't need someone that's all the way to the end that we're talking about right now. You could just have someone who sees the horribleness of war and how all that money's being spent, and they can see the ridiculousness in that. And that's what we're seeing is huge segments of our population who are starting to reject this war mentality, and they're either being forced to be pushed on it, like something like 9/11, where you think there's this terrorist enemy where you need to go, we got to go fight against it. And whereas it's
that Islamic boogeyman to keep us confused and scared.
Exactly. It's like this puppet show where they have to try to create an outside influence that's,
and they tried Rocket Man. Yep.
But it's really not. It's actually just a creation. And that's a difficult reality that people don't want to accept because of how many, and listen, I fully respect to the deepest level all of the soldiers and people that give their lives for this. I'm simply coming to the mentality that they didn't need to.
Right.
That they didn't need to sacrifice. And again, that's what it is. It's a sacrifice. You start getting into Bohemian Grove and all this weird sacrifice stuff at the top of these families, you'll start to see what I'm talking about. There's this really strange, very disturbing aspect where there's this sacrifice element to all of this, where human beings.
The Las Vegas shooting was called Harvest, you know. And
all of these human beings are sacrificed during certain times, and all of this. It's pretty unsettling stuff, but I think right now we're seeing the mentality changing over where I think you're seeing the collapse of all of these systems of control on our planet right now. It's happening on a slow level, but it's happening just because of the amount of information that's getting out there and the awakening that's occurring with people all across the world. And
that goes to why they're trying to control even the alternative media now, even us.
That's right.
How they're doing it on the down low, and they're, shadow banning and all that other stuff.
That's why all this stuff is, and these psyops are occurring on the internet and all these things. It's to try to affect people's perception of reality so they can't figure things out and then band together as a group. It's always about dividing. It's about dividing people. But right now,
do you think Facebook was invented for that reason as well?
It might have been, but I think it didn't really work out in exactly how they wanted, because I know a lot of people use it for really stupid stuff, but it has been used for a lot of really good purposes in my opinion too. And so that's what I wanted to end on is that we are, like Buddha says, all that we are is a result of our thoughts. They cannot create our reality. We have to create it. We have to be the ones that create it here. They can simply just manipulate and influence it, okay? So once someday in the future, humanity, we're going to become the co-creators, and it will be a golden age. And I think we're going to look back at this time, and we're going to study all of these psychological means for which information was conditioned and controlled so that people thought a certain way. And that's always happened. And we're going to look at the fact that individual thought and separating from the pack is going to be the mentality of the future, where everyone is their own independent person rather than just going along with whatever else some expert or whatever else someone says, because that's how we got in this problem in the first place, in my mind.
I agree with that. I totally believe that all wisdom, knowledge, truth is found within. Yep. Even if you're on a desert island all by yourself, you're still going to find it within.
Because you're going to have to spend time with yourself, and you're going to have to contemplate, and you're going to have to go deep. That's why so many people don't like to spend time alone and have all these distractions like constant music. Because when you're alone, you think and you get into thoughts, and maybe you'll start, start wondering about all these weird things that don't really make sense, and all these ways where, we're kept at the certain place that we're kept at. But I want to just say, Steve, I have, regardless of all these earth changes like we talked about in the beginning, this is a bumpy road that is going to lead to a golden age. We just need to get there. And through whatever means of whatever war they're going to try to start and whatever earth changes are going to occur, humanity is going to make it. And it's just going to have to do with the level of our understanding of studying these things in the past, so we don't make the same mistakes we made, So
don't buy into the hype, right? Don't buy into the rocket man nonsense, the nuclear this nonsense, or the, Tom Horn or Steve Quayle, Nephilim are going to come eat you.
Yeah, it's all misinformation. That's a great point. Be very careful of a lot of the misinformation that exists out there to try to hold us back and to keep us, we don't accept reality. Okay.
Have an open mind, not a pudding mind.
Exactly.
Well, Matthew, you've been excellent, man. And I'm glad you ended it on that positive note, because I totally 100% agree with you when it comes to that. Because, if not for you, who would I be, man? And,
Hey, thank you. That's an honor for you to say that. I'm so glad I've been such a part of your path, my friend.
Yeah. And I appreciate you. And look inward, everybody, love outward, and we can't go wrong.
Yeah, exactly. And please, anybody who wants to see more videos, I love to create videos and discussions. Check out my YouTube channel at Matthew LaCroix. And I'm The Illusion of Us is available right now, and I'm currently trying to finish the stage of time for, I hope, for around the new year. I'm really excited about it, though. I think it's going to be something that is the accumulation of my studies, basically. So.
Well, I'm definitely going to read it, and I'll tell you that. So.
Well, thank you so much, Steve. I hope we can chat again. I really appreciate the great discussion we had, my friend.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much.